Hello and welcome to today's webinar about improving the standard of service when it comes to repairs and maintenance. Obviously, today's event, sponsored by Locals, is about one of the housing sector's most crucial roles and a topic which obviously has received huge amounts of national media attention over the last 12 months. As well as the ITV News investigations, recent activity from the Housing Ombudsman gives us plenty of insight into the current state of play in the sector and areas that need improvement. Its February Insight report, to quote one example, revealed that residents got in touch with it about the condition of their property more than any other issue in the last 3 months of 2021. In fact, complaints about property condition made up 47% of its total workload in this period, and that report said that was a rising problem, with property condition complaints increasing from 39 to 47% of the total. And that coincides or almost coincides with its updated complaints handling code, which took effect in April, but landlords have a few more months to become compliant with. Among other things, that says landlords need to have a culture of continuous learning and improvement when it comes to complaints and demonstrate learning in annual reports. So today's webinar comes at something of a time of change and certainly a time of increased scrutiny and pressure on the sector. The idea today is to have a practically focused event with tips and advice about how to improve your approach and also perhaps a look at what pitfalls to look out for along the way. We'll be looking at how best to manage repairs and maintenance services, what role technology might play in improving customer service, and how best to measure resident satisfaction to raise the standard of homes and address some of the Ombudsman's demands. So yeah, quite a lot to get through, but really fundamental, important stuff for everybody who's tuned in today. To talk us through this and more, we've got a fabulous panel lined up for you today. We'll be hearing from Jennifer Ryans, Head of Dispute Resolution at the Housing Ombudsman, Dean Mahoney, Sales Director with Locals, and Andrew Rysdale, Assistant Director of Property with Fairhive. So welcome all, and we'll come to you in a minute. Unfortunately, Steve Southwell, the chair of the residents panel for Worthing Homes and a member of the Ombudsman's resident panel, who is down to speak today, isn't very well today. So we wish him all the best for a speedy recovery. Just a reminder to you before we kick things off, thank you all very much for tuning in. And like I say, really important discussion today, but this is absolutely an opportunity for you to ask the practical questions that will enable you to think about how best to go about improving your own services and how best to do things moving forwards. So there's a question and answer box. Please do use that, make use of that, and we'll get to as many questions as possible following the presentations, which we'll kick off with in a moment. Before we do that, let's just get a bit of a feel, kind of a starter for 10 really to warm you up. So got a question, a poll that's just popped up on your screen, hopefully. To what extent is your organisation using digital apps to improve your customer service offering? So just to give us a bit of a feel. Yeah, range of options there. Residents are able to book a repair on our app and receive regular updates. This is something we've just begun to think about. We haven't considered this so far, and of course, I don't know. So we'll just give you a couple more seconds to answer that. So yeah, please tick the one that's most appropriate to you now, and we'll move to the answers. So yeah, if we can move through to the results, let's have a look at where people in the room are today, and hopefully I'll just guide us a little bit when it comes to the questions and the presentations. Yeah, so a bit of a mixed bag. But interesting that people are maybe just moving into that space. So 55% saying it's just something they've begun to think about, and yeah, just over a third saying residents are able to book a repair on our app and receive regular updates, and a few that either don't know or haven't considered it. Great. Okay. Well, that gives us a bit of a feel for where you are, and now let's kick off with the presentations. So Jennifer, welcome, and the floor is yours. It's over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'll just move my slides through. My name is Jennifer Rhines. I'm Head of Dispute Resolution at the Housing Ombudsman Service. I've been at HOS for nearly 10 years now, and I'm currently leading the dispute resolution teams, which are teams that carry out the formal investigations and issue the investigation reports and the determinations into the complaints that we receive. So firstly, I just wanted to give you an overview of our role and sort of some of the current work that we're undertaking. Our vision is to improve residents' lives and housing services through complaints. We provide redress to 4.7 million households, and that's across 2,316 landlords. Our landlord membership is made up of housing associations, local authorities, ALMOs, co-ops, a very, very wide range of different types of landlords within our membership. Our dispute support teams, this reflects our front-end team who deal with the complaints and the inquiries that we first get when residents have made a formal complaint about their housing issue, or they have progressed the complaint somewhat in the complaints procedure, but may have reached a barrier on what to do next and how to actually get the issue resolved. It's a very, very, very busy group of teams, as I'm sure you can imagine, and we receive a lot of contact from residents every single day via telephone, email. We've got a web chat as well that's ongoing, so they're a very busy team. It's a useful team. They work hard to explain with residents the purpose of the complaints procedure, what it's there to do, how they should use it, how they can best use it and communicate with their landlords, give advice on how to make the complaint. We've got templates on our website that give them an idea of how to actually frame the complaint and what to say in it. And we can provide advice around what we'd expect landlords to do in certain areas. And, taking the topic of repairs, that could be explaining what we would expect your landlord to do in this situation to resolve the issue. So they're giving that practical advice to residents in terms of managing their expectations of what might happen with the complaint. The teams deal with 80% of the complaints received prior to it then entering our formal remit, which is really quite impressive. So that's 80% of the complaints that come into that team are resolved without needing further investigation. So that could be in the complaints procedure, before it or shortly after it. So there's quite a lot of resolution that goes on there that should be recognised. Then there's the dispute resolution department, I suppose, because we are getting bigger, so we're starting to use bigger words like department and not team. But those are the teams that I manage, and that's where we carry out the formal investigations and issue our determinations and findings. So we've got some figures from last year for you. We issued 2,614 formal decisions in 21-22, and this included 29 severe maladministration findings. We publish all of our decisions on the website now as a matter of course. The exception to that is cases where the resident might be readily identified and there might be particular vulnerabilities or something that would just be a bit too obvious that we wouldn't publish for them. And then also with the severe maladministration findings, we publish all of those cases, including those where there might be a risk of identification. But in those situations, it's a summary of the report that we put in to give a flavour for the issues that we considered, and then just to show that learning. So that's all available on our website if you had an interest in actually looking at some of our past decisions. We're now a much more proactive ombudsman. As part of our more recent expansion, we created a new directorate, which is our Quality Engagement and Development Directorate. And within that, we have an insight and development team who are responsible for sharing learning and insight that we have. We've produced recent spotlight reports and insight reports, as Martin mentioned earlier, and thematic reports on the work that we're doing. Some of the more recent thematic reports that we've done, the most recent one was in relation to managing agents and the interaction and the role that they play with our member landlords and the relationship that they have with residents. And then prior to that, we had the damp and mould report, which addressed the damp and mould issues and shared some recommendations for the sector on how to deal with the issues presenting there. Next then, just looking at the social white paper and some of the changes that we've made in response to the asks in the white paper. The first thing to note is that we had already been working on some of this stuff, and the white paper had recognised that we had taken some steps to respond to the preceding green paper. This includes the complaint handling code, which was initially launched in July 2020 and has had a recent revision, as Martin mentioned, in April, where landlords have until October 2020 to comply with the code and to complete the self-assessment that accompanies it, and to have that produced and published on their website. It contains standards for high quality complaint handling and promotes greater access and consistency. The more recent revisions to the code have been tightening up on that sort of access, consistency across the complaints procedure, and just really promoting that level of high quality complaint handling with landlord services to ensure that no matter where you are a resident, where you're a resident of social housing, that you receive the same service no matter who your landlord is in that sector. We also revised the Housing Ombudsman scheme that was back in September 2020, and within that we introduced a new power around being able to investigate potential systemic issues or wider issues that might be presenting within a group of complaints or at a particular landlord. So this new power falls under paragraph 50 of our new scheme, and it gives us the power to go beyond that individual complaint or landlord to investigate whether there is presenting evidence of more wider issues. We're calling them paragraph 50 in investigations in line with the paragraph in the scheme. We've got currently 4 of those types of investigations ongoing in my teams, one of which has been published and is on the website, the learning report for that. It relates to a local authority, and that shared the sort of issues that we had identified and the learning we had identified for the landlord in there, which will be applicable across the sector, because we always find, speaking to landlords, that an issue that's affecting one affects many. So it's important for us to be able to share the insight that we get from a group of cases with the wider sector. So we have more of those investigations that are ongoing, and further learning reports will be produced this year and into next. We also introduced new complaint handling failure orders. So these are orders that are issued either while the complaint is going through the complaints procedure, as part of the information and evidence requesting that we do, as part of the compliance that we seek for the orders that we make, and any of the other membership obligations that would exist in the scheme and in the code. So we have got processes in place in the teams to escalate issues with landlords, and if we feel that we're not getting an adequate response, or the resident isn't getting an adequate response and a timely response, we may consider issuing a complaint handling failure order. These are published then quarterly in a report that we have on complaint handling failure orders. Quarter 4's report is due out soon, in the next week or so. That will be available, and that lists the orders that we have made, gives you the type of order that was made, the reason it was made basically, and it lists the landlords that those were issued to. It also then picks out the orders that weren't complied with, because in these orders we will set out what we expect the landlord to do and by when, and so we will make a note of where the landlord hasn't been compliant with that, so that we have that recorded. We've also got a lot of internal change happening. Volumes are increasing like no other, and there's just such unprecedented demand on the service, so we absolutely need more staff. We need more staff in all sorts of roles in order to be able to support the work that we do, notwithstanding just getting the actual through the cases and investigations that we have. So there are lots of recruitment campaigns ongoing. We've just closed off the adjudicator and the investigator campaigns, which were 2 very, very big campaigns, and attracted a lot of interest. So there will be lots of growth in the next year, and continuing into the following year. We also want to provide a more of an enhanced service, and this is in particular going to be felt at that front end. We get a lot of contact from residents at the start of their sort of journey of being unhappy with the issue and wanting to progress their complaint, and not knowing where to go, and some needing some level of maybe advocacy support, etc. And as an ombudsman, we can't provide that advocacy support. We have to remain independent and impartial, but we recognise that there's a need for somebody to give the person the advice they need to put them in the right direction. So we're working on different projects about how we might be able to facilitate that. We're conscious of the pressures that citizens' advice bureaus and Shelter and all of the wonderful advice agencies out there have due to capacity and resourcing also. So we're going to see what we can do in that space to make it easier and more accessible for residents to have their complaints addressed. Then looking at just some of the legislative changes that will impact on the sector and ourselves. This year there's obviously the Social Housing Regulation Bill, which promotes transparency and awareness. Lots of big changes for the regulator in that. There's going to be the introduction of the Access to Information scheme for social housing tenants. And then also from our point of view, there's that stronger memorandum of understanding with the regulators, so it will put that on a statutory footing in terms of our obligations to consult with each other and to share information. We work very closely with the regulator and share lots of insight and information as a matter of course, and this just seeks to strengthen that relationship and to build on it and grow as the regulator moves more into consumer regulation and tenant satisfaction. So all good stuff that's coming there. Also with the Building Safety Now Act, as it recently had royal assent. This is another big piece of legislation coming through that sets up that new safety regime for residential buildings. It also establishes a building safety regulator. So for us, we need to start to think about how we'll interact and work with that regulator. And that will more than likely involve a memorandum of understanding about who does what and when, so that we're covering off what we need to there. There's also that protection for leaseholders mentioned in there to protect them from the cost of the remedial work that's been ongoing, which is an important addition. And then again, for us as an ombudsman service, it has the removal of the designated person filter in there, or the democratic filter as it's sometimes referred to. So this is in legislation part of the process that an individual needs to go through before they can access our service. Which is basically that they either, at the end of the landlord's complaints procedure, when they have their final decision, wait a period of 8 weeks, or they can approach a designated person, which is an MP, a councillor, or a designated tenant panel, and ask that the panel refers the complaint to us in writing. So it has been a bit of a blocker, I think. It hasn't really had the benefits that were maybe envisaged in the legislation at the time the Localism Act set it out. So I think its removal will mean easier access to us, and it just makes it clear for residents about what to do at the end of the landlord's process. They don't have to go into a complicated referral arrangement. So we're gearing up for that. We expect that to come through in October, it's looking like. For the changes that we'll need to make so that then residents can access our services directly. So we'll be working on making changes to get ready for that casework when it comes. Then just turning to complaints about repairs. So some information on overall complaints, which I've been warned to caveat from my business and performance analyst, because they are finalising the year-end stats. So this is the information, but they always say it needs to be finalised for the annual accounts. But I have some figures for you, which is interesting because this is the first time I've seen some of them as well. But it speaks to what we've been talking about in terms of the increase. So we've had a 65% overall increase, and that's in all complaints, in inquiries and complaints being received in 21-22 compared to the previous year. And then for the dispute resolution teams, this is quite phenomenal, a 77% increase in cases entering our firm remit last year compared to the previous year. So quite big increases. So repairs complaints, then in general, in more specific detail, Martin referred to our Q3 insight report, which had demonstrated the increase that we've seen with repairs complaints. We determined, and this is our investigations, so 30% of formal investigations in 2021 related to repairs, which rose then to 34 last year. So those are the formal complaints that were investigated. The overall cases, specifically in relation to repairs, it will be higher than those that go through. So I didn't have that figure, but it was 39 last year, 39% of cases, and 43% of cases the year before. At Q2, Q3, it was looking like 47% of cases. So there probably will be an increase on that. But it is always our biggest category, repairs complaints and the property condition, and that's always been the case for us. And so the last bit of information there for you is the orders that we make in relation to repairs at the end of investigation when we issue the decision and the determination to the landlord. So in 21-22, there was 116 repair orders made, and that rose to 172 last year. So just a little snippet of the stats for you. Just quickly go through some of the key issues we've identified more recently in the complaints about repairs. Records is an issue that keeps coming through the casework, and not having adequate records, incomplete or missing repairs logs that just don't tell the full story. And that is frustrating for us, because if we're missing evidence, we can't draw a conclusion on the substantive issue. So in those cases, what we end up doing more often than not is making a finding of poor record keeping, and quite often then the redress is a financial offering for the failure to keep adequate records. But that doesn't investigate the substantive issue. And so in repairs cases, it doesn't investigate what happened with the repair and what went wrong, which is frustrating for us. And then also the resident, because they don't have their complaint answered really. So keeping track of those repairs is just so important for landlords, the resident, and then it's so important for us to carry out our investigations. Just to pick up on verbal agreements, we get a lot of, I was told this and I was advised that, and that's where then the sort of difference of opinion between the landlord and the resident falls down, where we don't have any evidence to support either side. So if there is a verbal agreement, we would always say to record it on the system, send the resident a copy. It doesn't need to be fancy, even a verbatim note of what you've put on the system or a cutout of their log. You know, it's their information, just so that they know what was agreed and what was discussed, so that they have it and that there's that audit trail of what's been agreed with verbal agreements that might happen. And then picking up on old records, we're sort of increasingly seeing different types of complaints come through where there isn't access to old records because they've got lost in the computer or email system of employees that have left the organisation, or that they're paper copies that weren't scanned, or that they're paper copies that are in an office that people don't access as often as they do, and we can't get to them when we need them. So there is something that we're seeing that landlords need to think about, old records and how you're keeping track of records that you might need, what the retention policy is that you have. Does everybody understand what should be deleted and when? Like things like a tenancy agreement should never be deleted. And so just being clear on what records you keep, how you're keeping them, because when we're doing our investigations, we'll ask for old records to give the context of the history. The residents will speak about the history of their case. It's important that we're able to pick out what happened at that time. Moving on then to missed and unproductive appointments. This is another big issue that is really starting to emerge in cases at the moment, around access. We're hearing it from landlords and we're hearing it from residents, and I still haven't really been able to pick out what it is that's happening and what's the problem. So landlords will say we can't get access, we've tried, and residents will say I waited at home, no one arrived. There's this real mismatch and there's real issue with access at the moment. And so we do have cases where we make findings in relation to missed appointments, because we'll have the resident wait at home and the operative doesn't arrive, or you'll have the landlord the day before give the resident a 1 or 2 hour slot, and that's the notice that they get. So don't take into account what the resident might need to do in terms of rearranging their day, their work, their children, whatever it is they might be. So a landlord that tells us that that's an access issue, we just need to understand a bit more about why is it an access issue? What is the problem with access at the moment? Because it seems to be presenting itself across the board for us. And then the next thing we hear a lot of and that we see in the cases is these unproductive appointments. So operatives that arrive that don't have the skills to actually do the work that's needed. They don't have the equipment to do the work that's needed, or they have the wrong part for the wrong model or whatever it might be. And that tends to be a feature then, because that will be frustrating for the resident on the day because no work happens, and then they have to book it in again, and then you get back into the access issue again. So it sort of prolongs that repair getting completed. And then the final point to pick out that we always say about our cases really is around the communication. And in repairs, the communication and the sort of lack of follow-up in repairs cases is an important thing that I'll just pick out there. From the start, it's so important to manage expectations with repairs complaints, particularly depending on the type of repair. So there might be a window that you need a particular part for, it has to be built by a bespoke service, or there might be an issue with getting something that you need and some of the production lines are causing problems for landlords. I think tell the residents that. We've seen that isn't happening enough, that the residents are just left waiting without knowing why. And it's perfectly reasonable that there's a delay for whatever reason, but the resident isn't being informed of that. So we'll say, manage their expectations about the length of time that this will take, even if that is 6 to 12 weeks. Be realistic about what's needed. Tell them what you can do in the meantime to maybe do a patch repair or to help manage the situation, and then to keep them updated. And really, that's all they'll need, because as long as they understand that there's a wait time on this, they should be fine with it. And then also just to check that what has been agreed has happened. This is a real issue at the end of the complaints procedure, where we see brilliant letters that are sent that identify the key issues and set out what they'll do to put things right. And then that's where it stops. And then the communication dies off, the action dies off, and there's sort of a hole for the resident in terms of the communication. It's so important to check that the repairs that have been agreed as redress and resolution to the complaint are actually carried out, and that they're carried out, and that the contractors and the providers have evidence that it's been carried out. And that's really key for us, and we see that a lot in that period between when the complaint has finished its sort of formal investigation and the work has been agreed, but then there isn't enough follow-up and recording and auditing of the work and what's been carried out. And then the last one is the resident satisfied. It's so key to ask that. Are you happy with the work? Is it what you were expecting? Is it to the standard you were expecting? Is it the thing you thought it would be? And that does come up a lot when they'll say, oh, I thought you were going to also do that window, or I didn't realise that the bath would be this style, or whatever the thing might be. Just check with the resident, is this what you expected, and are you happy that it resolves it? Because what we see a lot is where residents aren't happy in the aftermath of a formal complaint, and because of that they start a new complaint, and it starts the complaints process over again because they're not happy with the standard of the repairs they received or the service following their last complaint, and that leads to another one. And so then just to capture my last slide on just some of the key takeaways for you is to get it right at the start. So that stuff around early diagnosis of the issue, giving the repair the right priority, making sure you've noted the right model, the right part that you need, that the right level of operative is going, surveys done, all of that sort of stuff to get that right early on is so important, and will really benefit then the sort of long-term handling of the issue. Communication, which I've touched on, keep it going throughout, even where there's delays, have those points where you update residents about there's nothing happening now because, so that they're kept in the loop. We have to do that ourselves at the Ombudsman. We've got so many complaints that we deal with, and they go through different parts of their process. And when they reach certain parts, they have to wait. So like when it's completed, the landlord's process, we need to get evidence. And so we're very conscious of saying that ended, that sort of intense communication you had with our dispute support teams. Now there's a period of waiting while we do our evidence checks, decide what we need, issue it to the landlord, give them the time to gather it, and then it moves on through our process. So it's about when things move, keeping the resident involved in what's happening and why. Using the complaints process effectively. It's there as a tool. It gives you as landlords and the resident a framework to actually resolve the issues that are presenting, with the substantive issue around repair, and then also to pick up the issues that they will have on customer service, how they've been treated, how they've been handled. And it gives that staged process to actually effectively deal with the issue. It's a real tool for landlords to resolve complaints so that issues don't drift and then go on for longer than they should. So it should be used. The fourth point there is on managing contractor and third-party relationships. So this is more directed towards those external contractors and third parties like managing agents that some landlords might have involved in particular estates or blocks or even, across the whole. The communication and the respective responsibilities need to be really clear with those parties so that an external contractor doesn't just show up, that you're clear on who's meant to make the appointment, who's meant to confirm it with the resident, is it the contractor or the landlord or the managing agent if there's one involved, so that there is actually that cohesion between the parties that are external to the landlord about who will contact the resident when, if the resident complains to the contractor on site, what happens with that, where does it go, and when they complain to the managing agents, the same. And then hugely key for us, because we're all about it, is to identify the learning from each case. I mean, this is the real bonus that you get from a complaint, because there will be the more serious ones. There's the more severe findings that we make where it can be whole-scale reviews that are needed of particular systems or approaches or revisions of policies that are needed, But in a large majority of cases, it won't be something that has gone badly wrong. It'll be looking back and saying, yeah, at that point we missed it. We should have said this, or we should have gone with that approach, or we should have tweaked it this way. So it's not whole scale changes to approaches. It's just maybe the first contact team didn't communicate that to the contractor. So when the contractor went, they didn't have the right information. There's so much learning that you can track back from each individual case to refine the service. It doesn't need whole scale changes, but just making it better every time so that the next person that uses it doesn't experience that minor issue that might have, led to the complaint in the previous case. And that is it from me. Last one is just our social media handles and so on. So thank you very much for listening.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Yeah, a huge amount to pick up on. I see we've got some questions coming in already. Just a quick reminder from me that this is absolutely about you getting the answers to the questions that are going to be most useful to you, that will guide your thinking and hopefully guide your own organisation's behaviour and performance. So do get those questions coming in, and I'll pick up on as many as possible very shortly. Thank you, Jennifer. Dean, welcome, and it is over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. Look, good afternoon all. As mentioned, my name is Dean Mahoney. I am the UK Sales Director for Locals. I guess firstly, thank you for taking time out of your day to attend the webinar. Essentially, I'm going to take you through a few slides and obviously talk around how Locals are looking to support customers when it comes to the day of service and unsurprisingly around the repairs and maintenance side of things. So first of all, kind of what we're going to think about is what impact a new solution can have, I guess, on the customer and the business journey. Typically, what we tend to find within business is when, I guess, it comes to implementing new solutions, be that from a customer or operational standpoint, the vast majority of the time when you actually implement a change for a positive customer experience, you tend to find that the impact is actually less efficient operationally. And flipping it on its head, when you look to implement change for, I guess, a positive operational efficiency side, the impact is actually negative for the customer experience. Obviously, that's not all the time, but what you tend to find that is the vast majority of it. At Locals, we look to kind of flip that on its head and change that with the key driver looking to increase, first of all, customer satisfaction on the day of service, but also looking to increase the operational efficiencies, specifically focused around the impact of no access appointments and also costs of chase calls that actually come into the customer service and scheduling teams. What we find is that by simply bridging the disconnect between the business and the customer on the day of service, by essentially providing a more consistent, transparent communication approach with obviously shorter ETA windows instead of the larger kind of AM standards, kind of AM PM style that are usually provided. It looks to directly reduce those inbound ETA chase calls and no access visits on the day of service. As what we tend to find is a frictionless field service ultimately starts with a seamless customer service experience leading up to and on the day of appointments. So obviously customer expectations have risen. So look, how do we look to potentially tackle the rise in customer expectations? Obviously, when it comes to customer communications, a lot of companies already have strategies in place. But what you tend to find is they can be quite old and outdated, as in reality, customer expectations are always evolving. And I would even say these expectations have probably been accelerated in the past few years with the emphasis of, I guess, time, flexibility, being more important on everybody's day-to-day lives. With these, I guess, increasing expectations, more and more industries are feeling the pressure from these emerging customer desires, be that from real-time communication and transparency to 2-3-way communication and different services that actually look to revolve and evolve around the customer's needs. our customers have essentially found that by making sure the customer is engaged before the appointment with the right message at the right time has actually helped dramatically increase customer satisfaction through their scores and metrics. Moving on to the feedback. So look, at the end of the day, gathering positive feedback is great. However, in reality, negative feedback is far more powerful in the actual desire to I guess, it impacts customer satisfaction scores. As our customers find that when, I guess, feedback is generated in real time, it can actually help capture positive statements and significantly increase chances of service recovery where that negative feedback has actually been shared. Whilst, I guess, in reality, also reducing the complaint workload for your teams and process. Build on that, our recent numbers show that 35% of feedback is actually received within the first 5 minutes of a service appointment being completed, of which 80% of feedback is, or say that again, of which actually 80% of negative feedback is also given within that time frame, essentially highlighting, I guess, the capacity for housing associations not only to receive it, but also recover on the day of service before these actually escalate to a complaint level. And what you tend to find is, obviously, customers almost always want to give feedback. Whether it's good or not, they tend to want to share it. Either way, the best time to actually gather that feedback from your customer is immediately after the appointment, as what you'll tend to find is the negative reviews are usually submitted kind of days or weeks after the service actually happens, and they actually tend to come kind of laced with anger and frustration. And we all know that at this point, it's ultimately too late for your teams to actually make amends and proactively react to make a difference. Final slide for myself. I guess some key findings and results from our customers so far in 2022. Obviously, on average, the actual volume of customer service chase calls have increased by 25%, down to a number of reasons, but the main one being an increase in work in progress jobs, alongside the actual the need and requirement for customers to know critical information on the day of service in order to plan their days. As mentioned before, obviously time is more important. People have other things to do rather than just sitting there all day and wait for an appointment. We've found that obviously by providing that shorter ETA arrival time over those, as mentioned before, larger AM/PM style windows, our customers have actually seen a reduction in 37% of no access visits. By proactively communicating reminders and arrival times, this has also helped deliver a 40% reduction in chase calls on the day of service, and look to actually assist in making, I guess, the tenants feel valued and in the know. And final point from my side, actually responding to negative feedback within 30 minutes of actually receiving it has actually helped increase customer CSAT scores by 12 points. And I guess the whole goal and emphasis around it is actually making sure the tenant has felt, obviously goes away feeling understood, and then the issue that they're having is actually being dealt with. So look, that's it from myself. Obviously very short, very sweet, but obviously hopefully you get some gatherings and some good information from it. Obviously, once again, thank you for listening, and feel free to get in touch in the future.
Thanks very much, Dean, and I think some really great food for thought there. Particularly, also, I think around organisations that might be a bit stretched. That actually this can be about building capacity back into the system rather than taking additional capacity out. Thanks very much for that. We've got plenty of questions coming through. Just a reminder to you tuning in, this is absolutely about your chance to hopefully get the answers that are useful to you. So do use that Q&A box, and I'll get through as many as possible following the last presentation. So thank you very much, Dean, and Andrew. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. So thank you, Dean. I'm Andrew Rysdale, Assistant Director of Property at Fairhive Homes. For those of you who don't recognise the name Fairhive, we were previously Vale of Aylesbury Housing Trust and went through a rebrand about a month ago. So I've been with the organisation now for about 9 years, and I took over the running of the responsive repairs and the property side at the back end of 2019, just sort of a few months prior to COVID really hitting. When I took over, the team was doing okay. It was working reasonably well. The satisfaction figures were okay. But as we progressed through COVID, we did see some worrying signs that performance was beginning to dip. So I took a step back and tried to see what those warning signs were and how we could address them. So, as I said, customer satisfaction throughout the last 2 years has actually been pretty good. It's been relatively consistent, so we haven't need to worry about that. Complaints-wise, we actually implemented the new complaints handling code April 2001, and as we did so, over last year, the number of complaints doubled in the year, particularly at the beginning of the year. And the consequence of that was that my repairs managers were having to spend far more of their time investigating the repairs, responding to the residents, the complaints, etc., and almost taking them away from their day job of actually having the repairs undertaken. As it probably resonates throughout through other organisations as well. Our backlog of repairs increased during COVID, and as a consequence of that, the waiting times increased as well. So residents were having to wait longer for the repairs when they rang through. And then our callback rates. We aim to return calls to residents within 48 hours, but the callback rate was particularly low, certainly when I took over. So we had to look at how we could address that. So what I did was almost decided to put myself into the shoes of a resident and see what processes they had to go through to report a repair. So at the time, generally they would ring through to our contact centre to try and report a repair. When they did get through, they were quite often put on hold for a period of time, which is not a good start. When they did get through to one of our contact centre team, they were offered a full day appointment. And that was quite often several weeks in advance, so they'd have to wait for that repair. When that day came round, we would send one of our trade operatives out. They'd have a look at the job, inspect it. Quite often they'd find that they didn't have the materials, they didn't have the expertise, so they'd therefore book a follow-on appointment, another full-day appointment, and that could be, again, within a couple of weeks after that initial repair. So, again, the resident wasn't receiving what they were after. When the repair was eventually undertaken, we employed a company to do a telephone satisfaction survey. So we did 10% of the repairs that were undertaken, but that satisfaction survey took place at least 2 weeks after the repair was completed. So by that time, the resident quite often had almost forgotten about the repair. So it wasn't really day to day of what we were finding. So overall, it was a pretty poor customer experience that our residents were going through. So we decided, sort of 6 months or so, right, how could we address this? And so first of all, the organisation was looking at a new online portable and app. We call it My Home Hub, and that allows the residents to self-service their rent accounts. But it also means that they can identify the type of repair that they require. They can book an appointment. And the appointment they can book is at a time that's convenient to themselves. Now, this isn't an advert for locales. Inside Housing didn't know we actually had locales before they asked me to present on this. But during COVID, I was sat home, like many of you, probably online ordering, etc. DPD would come out and deliver the orders, and I could track where my DPD delivery was. So I sat at home thinking, right, surely we can do something similar with our repair operatives. So we looked into it, and we decided we'd move forward with locales and their operative on-way system. So you've just heard about that, but basically our residents are now sent a tracking link so they can click on that and they can track where the operative is. It's still a full day appointment, but it means that they can go out and about knowing that they're not going to miss the time when our operative turns up. And as Dean just said, we've seen a considerable reduction in the number of no access visits as a consequence of that. We've been installing switchy smart heating controls for a number of years now, but we decided to increase the install of those. Not only does it help residents with managing their heating itself, but it also provides us with a load of information. One of those is information about damp and mould, so that we can proactively look at those properties that are going to be suffering from damp and mould and contact the residents first before they contact us, so that we can try and address the situations that we find ourselves in. As I said, the callback rates were particularly low, so I took a zero tolerance approach with my repairs planners to say there's no excuse why people weren't ringing back within 48 hours. And through a stronger management of those guys, that's also improved. The backlog of repairs, that was slightly more difficult to address. So we looked at it. It's been difficult to appoint a decent trade operatives, especially at the moment. They're hard to come by. So what we decided to do was we took on agency staff, which isn't the cheapest way to do it. But during COVID, there were various work streams that we couldn't undertake. So there was money about. So we've taken on trade staff, just in particular areas where we were finding pinch points, etc., mainly sort of plastering and carpentry work, and take on a couple of trade ops in those areas just to help us through, so we can get back to an even keel on those ones. The inspection code, when we book appointments, we've just about got rid of that inspection code now. And what we try and do is allocate the repairs, the type of repairs, to the particular trade op. So if there's a new kitchen tap fitted, we'll send out a plumber. So at least we stand a fighting chance of having that repair completed actually on the first visit, rather than having to do a follow-on appointment. And then customer satisfactions, I got rid of the telephone satisfaction survey that we were undertaking. Locales, as you have just heard, Locales does have an instantaneous link. So as soon as the repair is completed, the resident can click on the link and let us know what they thought of that repair. That also, we've also linked that. So if there's any evidence of dissatisfaction, that links straight through to our contact centre, so that our contact centre can give the resident a ring, find out what's up, and if necessary, we can send the operative back that day to try and resolve the situation. So therefore, it avoids the complaints going forward. Now, this really is a work in progress. We're not there yet. We've literally just had the end of year results for last year. And just going through this, I just thought I'd provide you a little bit of update where we are. So customer satisfaction, top left-hand side. We still do the perception survey, so that's taken into account in other surveys that we do. That's still a telephone survey, but the question about repairs is part of a bigger survey. 2021, we had is just over 81%. The end of last year increased to just under 82%, which doesn't sound a huge increase. But what we've seen throughout the year, that's an average for the year. Throughout the year, that's increased. In March, that went up to 84.25%, which is a considerable increase. Locales, that's the transactional customer satisfaction immediately after the survey has been undertaken. As you can see, that's generally between 90 and 95%. I get sent a link every week to see that, and every week it's between 90 and 95%. And that tells me that our residents are generally happy with the work that our operatives are doing and the way that we're working. The callback response rates, 2021, it was 53%. Through again, last year, the average for the year was 93%, and it's increased through the year. So that no-nonsense approach to work with our repairs planners, that's made a significant difference. And that goes alongside keeping residents informed of what we're doing. So if they have got a considerable wait for some of the repairs that aren't quite as urgent, we'll give them a ring after a few weeks just to let them know where they are, what we're doing. The overdue repairs, as I said, it's an expensive way of doing it, using agency staff, but you can see this significant decrease in overdue repairs. Just over a year ago, it stood just under 2,000. Last month, it reduced to just over 1,000. So and we're gradually reducing the number of agency staff we have now, and our staff our directly employed staff will take that over. So we're hoping that will continue. And then a number of complaints. As I said, we went live with the revised complaints procedures in April 2001. So prior to that, we had 63 complaints with repairs. Last year, it went up to 120, although it's been relatively static. We've got more of a handle on what we're doing with complaints, so it's a better way of working. It was a bit of a rude awakening when we first went live on it, and everybody was running around saying, why are the complaints going up so much? But we're working through that now, and it's more of an even keel on that one as well. So that's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour on what we found to date, what we've done. As I say, it's that there's some green shoots appearing, certainly coming out of COVID, there's some green shoots appearing. We're hoping that with the staff we've got, with the trade ops we've got, we can continue that through, and we can see results improve as we go through the years to come. So that's where we are. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, absolutely fascinating, and again, a lot to pick up on. Some of the figures there are really interesting to discuss. We've got a number of questions coming through now as well, which I'll try and pick up on as many as I possibly can in the time that remains to us. So yeah, just keep a reminder to keep them coming in, and I'll pick up on as many as possible. And I might start off with a kind of an opener for 10 from Will. So Jennifer, I'll bring you back in to play. And Will was asking, why do you think more tenants are coming directly to the Ombudsman now more than ever? So yeah, that's Will's question, and I guess it's interesting to discuss. Is it just the publicity? Is there actually an increase in as we were talking about some of the repairs backlogs from COVID? What are the reasons, do you think? What are you hearing? So Jennifer, over to you.
Interesting question, because we've had to ask that ourselves internally, and it's a combination of things, isn't it? So the complaint handling code itself, that did create greater awareness of us. Landlords, through their self-assessments and making their residents more aware of us, increased the number of people coming to us. As Andrew said, with the implementation of the code, they saw an increase in people making complaints. So there was that shift into making more complaints and then coming to us. There were various government awareness raising campaigns that were on social media, on the radio, all sorts, that were directing people to our services. And then the stuff in the media, different types of complaints that gained attention and reference to us. We've also got a new ombudsman since September 19 who has led the service to be more proactive in the sector. So is keen to make ourselves more aware, more accessible. So a combination of things, I think, has led to it. But certainly there are more coming out than ever did.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And Andrew, I might move to you with that question, and Dean, I'll bring you in, and then I'll move to kind of some more specific ones as well. So Andrew, just a few thoughts about that. Why more might be coming forward, and actually your own theories, because I was just looking at those figures there again, really interesting. You referenced them yourself, I think. Was it complaint? Your overdues down. Callback times improving, but the number of complaints coming through also up. So what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, just to put it in context, that has doubled up to sort of 120 in a year, but that's from 23,500 repairs that we undertook last year. So it is still a very small proportion. I mean, one of the things we did prior to that, we had an expression of dissatisfaction, which we didn't actually class as a complaint. Now that went, and so all of those now became complaints. So that was probably one of the biggest reasons why our complaint numbers increased. So dissatisfaction, what we did, obviously when it's a complaint, we have to go through our complaints procedure and follow that through. So prior to that, if it's an expression of dissatisfaction, we could usually ring the resident up and try and get to a resolution without going through to a full complaint. So that's probably why the numbers increased significantly for us.
Thanks, Andrew. And a specific question coming through from Roy for you. I just put it to you very quickly there, but this is about the how you do things. And a question for Andrew: can this process be effective, not having a direct labour force but using external contractors? So the who you're using, is that important, or can it work kind of across the board?
I think it can do. We do use both. Certainly with the backlog that we've had, we do use external contractors as well. So it's obviously the locale system that we use. I think that's more difficult. I don't know whether you can use that with external contractors. So therefore, there's a discrepancy between the two there. So if we send one of our local contractors out to do a repair, the resident wouldn't necessarily have that facility to track where that operative is. So I think there are some things we do, but I think with external contractors, it comes down to almost strong management with the external contractors as well, to make sure that they're providing the same level of service that we are in-house. We do generally find that the customer satisfaction for our own operatives is slightly higher than external contractors, which from my point of view is a good thing, that at least we're doing the right sort of thing. But what I'm challenging my managers to do that manage these external contractors is bring them up to our level, so that they can do exactly the same.
Thanks, Andrew. And Dean, I'll bring you in on that question, and also a specific question that's come through from one viewer saying, can you delete negative feedback from locales? So I'm presuming that's a question about quite how trusted some of those figures can be. Can they be manipulated? So, Dean, a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, of course. So I guess to the first point with the external contractors, Andrew summed up perfectly. It's making sure that they're accountable for the same level of service that you provide. Obviously, if they don't use the same solution, you're not going to be able to get the exact same service. But then we do work with contractors as well. So it's even if maybe you're a big customers of theirs, getting them involved early, getting them an understanding of how you work, and looking to replicate that from their side as well. And ultimately, from the contractor side as well, it's only going to help them in the future for potentially winning further business down the line, different offerings and different kind of ROIs from their perspective. I did actually see the one about deleting feedback. I think no, the answer is you can't delete it. I'd probably throw a question back is why, or not even why, but who would be looking to delete that? Is that maybe from the drivers / operative side? But no, you can definitely, obviously, because it's all associated to a specific job, all that history is there. Obviously, you can mark it as acknowledged, so you understand, okay, this has been looked at, but that's going to be there on the file.
Thanks very much. That's really good to hear. Yeah, I presume it was a question aimed at whether any individual within the system could, for any reason, remove stuff that they didn't want others perhaps to see. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to move on to a question, actually. Jennifer, I'll bring you back into to play now. A question that's come through, which relates to obviously a huge issue that's got a lot of national attention over the last year, and indeed has a specific ombudsman a report attached to it. A question that says, if customers do not use heating or use ventilation units in property and then suffers condensation / mold, what are we as landlords supposed to do? And I'll just to anybody tuning in who doesn't know, the Ombudsman put out a report last year, a spotlight on damp and mold, and it was kind of had the heading, "It's not lifestyle." So there was definitely some quite strong challenge from the Ombudsman to that there. But yeah, is there any sympathy there? And Kevin's question there was, what are we as landlords supposed to do? So Jennifer, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, I would recommend reading the report. It's on the website and has got lots of useful information and background in relation to the types of complaints that we received on damp and mold, and then has recommendations for landlords and specific landlords that we had referred to in the report we've since worked with. And there's lots of changes that's happening in the damp and mold space. I think there's been a real realization about lifestyle and certain messages that were being given to residents about what is your responsibility in your property, where and long-standing advice on the heating issue in particular, I think, is becoming more and more challenging in modern times, especially with the rising cost of living and fuel poverty. The old advice of having your heating low all day long is just not going to work anymore. There has to be different solutions to this. So I think landlords need to sort of, there's a lot of whole-scale review of approach to damp and mold happening. There's landlords that now are having damp and mold charters and all sorts of initiatives started off to really look at the issues that are causing it. And what you can do to help the resident. With the ventilation, some of the stuff is about explaining the type of system that's in place and how they might be best able to use it, because there's lots of different amazing ventilation systems out there, and that will, I think, continue to increase as landlords do look at ventilation as an issue. We see it as an issue more often. So a lot of the stuff is around explaining to the residents at the point of letting about what the system can do for you and how you should use it, and just giving them advice and keeping them informed. So the report is a good place to start, I think, rather than taking up too much time here. And there's some good recommendations in there for landlords, but just to start to think about it a bit differently, maybe in the way that we have previously, and to not make the sort of tenants feel like it's their responsibility that the property is handed up in this way. That's not to say that it's always the landlord's responsibility, because some of this has wider issues where there's overcrowding, etc. But it's just to sort of have that message a bit, to think about the message for the resident.
And Jennifer, just very quickly, because there's a follow-up question on that, and I know obviously it's something that's been of fundamental importance to the sector over the last year, so I'll just very quickly come back with you with that. There's a question that if a tenant reports mould but refuses access to treat it, what's the best course of action? The question here is, would you advise reporting to environmental health? Is there any advice in that kind of circumstance? Jennifer, just very quickly, if that's okay.
Yes, so some of the issues that we have heard from landlords in relation to this problem around access is where the tenant may have been approached by a lawyer on the estate, or these no win no fees rogue lawyers that people report to us, where they have been specifically told to deny access for their disrepair claim in order to progress that through. We would never advise a resident to refuse access to a landlord to carry out a repair. So anyone that does approach us, we would absolutely say to let your landlord in. Stay involved with your lawyer if you want, that's absolutely fine, but do not go down the route of denying access. Landlords then have...
Is that a big problem, Jennifer? Is that something you're hearing a lot about, or is that just a...
It started to come through, but it's just tying into this issue with access. We're still trying to get to the crux of what's happening with access, and all of the speakers today referred to access being a problem and how technology might be able to assist with it, and where the pinch points are. And we haven't really got to it yet. It's something that we're kind of more aware of and want to sort of look further into. But it has been something that landlords have mentioned to me. I haven't seen it in the cases yet, but landlords have said to me that they're having a problem with access because the residents have told us that their lawyer said, don't give them access. We need to progress the disrepair claim. So I haven't seen it in the casework yet, so I don't have a case that I could describe, but I've certainly had those reports from landlords. It's something that is possibly, impacting on getting the repairs completed. It doesn't benefit the resident. We would always say that to them, it's just delaying things. Yeah.
Interesting, and do get in touch if that's an issue for you. I'm going to throw one very quick question at you, Dean, because we're just about out of time. But interested to hear panelists' thoughts on also seeking residents' feedback 1 month following a repair, and not just immediately. So I guess the idea is, I think the gist of the question is that some problems might develop a bit further down the line. How are they being captured? So, Dean, just very quickly, because we're almost out of time, I'll throw that at you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I did see that one as well, and it's probably one to take away in reality. Obviously, at the moment, we offer the instantaneous feedback, but it might even be one to look at that. Say, for instance, obviously, if they've had a good experience, you're probably not going to want another further message a month down the line. But it might be the case of, okay, anyone who's had a negative feedback from maybe 1 to 2 stars, whatever it may be, they get a follow-up on. So, to be fair, I noted that down. It's one what I'm going to take forward and suggest. It might be one we run towards our customers. See, would this be helpful? But at the moment, we don't. But it's definitely one to think about.
Fabulous. Thanks very much. And I am afraid we are out of time. We've got through hopefully a decent cross section of those questions. Thank you so much for sending them in. Hope that's been useful to you and giving you some takeaways to go back to your own day-to-day jobs with. So thank you all very much for tuning in. Thank you to our fabulous panel for a really great series of presentations and a discussion. And also thanks to Locales for sponsoring and making it possible today. So yes, thank you all again. And I will leave you to go and get some lunch, and see you all very soon. Thank you.